They knew they were going to die. There would be no reinforcements, no rescue, no miracle at the last moment. The enemy surrounded them completely. Ammunition was running out. Wounds were untreated. Escape was impossible. And yet, instead of surrendering, they chose to stand and fight. These are not stories of victory. They are stories of defiance. Moments when soldiers, warriors, and entire armies faced certain death and refused to break. These are the deadliest last stands in history, where being outnumbered, surrounded, and doomed did not mean giving up. A last stand is not about winning the battle. It is about buying time, sending a message, or choosing honor over survival. Throughout history, these moments have shaped wars far beyond the battlefield itself. Sometimes they delayed invasions, sometimes they inspired nations, sometimes they terrified enemies, and sometimes they simply proved that human resolve can exist even when hope is gone. One of the most famous last stands of all time took place in ancient Greece at the Battle of Thermopylae. When the massive Persian army marched toward Greece, King Leonidas of Sparta knew his force of roughly 300 Spartans, along with several thousand Greek allies, could not defeat them. The goal was never victory, it was delay. Narrow mountain passes neutralized Persian numbers, allowing the Greeks to hold for days against overwhelming force. When Betrayal revealed a hidden path around their position, Leonidas dismissed most of the allies and remained behind with his Spartans and a few others. They fought until they were completely annihilated. Every Spartan died. But their sacrifice bought time for Greece to unite, and their stand became a symbol of resistance that still echoes thousands of years later. In ancient Rome, one of the bloodiest last stands occurred at the Battle of Cannae, not for the defenders, but for the trapped. After Hannibal's brilliant encirclement, tens of thousands of Roman soldiers found themselves surrounded with no escape. There was no organized retreat, no way out. Roman discipline collapsed into desperate survival. Soldiers fought back to back, knowing death was inevitable. Ancient accounts describe a slaughter so intense that bodies piled up, making it difficult to swing weapons. By the end of the day, over 50,000 Romans were dead. It was one of the worst military disasters in history, and a chilling reminder that last stands are not always heroic, they are often horrifying. In medieval times, the Battle of Stamford Bridge marked the violent end of the Viking Age. When the English army surprised the invading Norse forces, the Vikings were caught without armor, scattered across the river. One lone Viking warrior reportedly held a narrow bridge, holding off dozens of English soldiers by himself. One man against an army. He killed so many attackers that the English were forced to crawl beneath the bridge and spear him from below. That single stand delayed the English long enough for the Vikings to regroup, even though they would eventually be defeated. It was a moment of pure defiance, an anonymous warrior standing between history and inevitability. During the Crusades, the fall of Jerusalem in 1187 included numerous last stands as defenders fought street by street against Saladin's forces. Knights, civilians, and exhausted soldiers defended walls and gates, knowing the city would fall. Many chose to fight to the death rather than surrender. Though Jerusalem was ultimately captured, the resistance prevented total annihilation and led to negotiated surrender terms. Even doomed resistance can change outcomes, not by winning, but by shaping how defeat unfolds. In Japan, the siege of Shirayama in 1877 marked the final stand of the samurai. Facing modern imperial forces equipped with rifles and artillery, the remaining samurai were hopelessly outmatched. They charged anyway. Armed mostly with swords, they rushed machine gun fire, knowing they would not survive. It was not tactical, it was symbolic. By morning, nearly all were dead. Their last stand marked the end of centuries of samurai dominance and the beginning of modern Japan.
Sometimes a last stand is the final chapter of an entire way of life. One of the most brutal last stands of the modern era occurred during World War I at the Battle of Verdun. French forces were ordered to hold their ground at all costs against relentless German attacks. Trenches became graves, artillery fire never stopped. Entire units were wiped out repeatedly, replaced by fresh soldiers sent into the same killing fields. Verdun became a symbol of endurance through annihilation. The French army lost hundreds of thousands of men, but refused to retreat. The phrase, "they shall not pass," became a vow made real through unimaginable sacrifice. World War II produced some of history's most desperate last stands. During the Battle of Stalingrad, surrounded Soviet units fought on with no supplies, no reinforcements, and no hope of escape. Soldiers hid in ruins, fought over single buildings, and held positions even when completely cut off. Starvation, freezing temperatures, and constant bombardment turned the city into a graveyard. Yet those doomed defenders tied down German forces long enough for a massive counteroffensive that encircled the invaders instead. Many Soviet soldiers died without ever knowing that their sacrifice helped turn the tide of the war. Another legendary last stand occurred on Iwo Jima. Japanese defenders, vastly outnumbered and isolated, dug into tunnels and bunkers across the island. They knew surrender was not an option. The strategy was not to win, but to inflict maximum casualties and delay the enemy as long as possible. For weeks, they resisted one of the most powerful military forces on Earth. Nearly all the defenders were killed. Their stand did not stop the invasion, but it reshaped how the war was fought afterward. In the Pacific, the Battle of Wake Island saw a small American garrison repel initial Japanese attacks despite being heavily outnumbered. Cut off from reinforcements and supplies, the defenders fought far longer than expected, sinking ships and shooting down aircraft. When they finally surrendered, it was only after ammunition ran out. Their resistance shocked Japanese command and boosted Allied morale at a time when defeats were common. In Africa, the Battle of Isandlwana saw British troops overwhelmed by Zulu warriors. While the battle itself was a disaster for the British, what followed became legendary. At Rorke's Ridge, a small British force fortified a mission station and held off thousands of Zulu attackers. For hours they fought behind makeshift barricades, knowing help would not arrive in time. The defenders survived, but only because they refused to break under impossible odds. It became one of the most studied defensive stands in military history. Sometimes last stands are not fought by armies, but by cities. During the siege of Masada, Jewish rebels held out atop a desert fortress. When Roman forces finally breached the walls, they found the defenders dead by their own hands. They had chosen death over capture. Masada became a symbol of resistance and sacrifice that still resonates today. What makes these last stands unforgettable is not the outcome, but the choice. These fighters did not fight because they believed they would win. They fought because surrender meant something worse than death, or because their stand might buy time, inspire others, or preserve honor. Last stands strip war down to its rawest truth. When survival is impossible, meaning becomes the weapon. History often remembers conquerors and victors, but it is shaped just as much by those who refuse to yield. Their deaths slowed invasions, broke momentum, and changed strategies. Their stories traveled faster than armies. Fear, respect, and inspiration followed in their wake. Outnumbered, surrounded, doomed. These words describe defeat on paper, but in reality, they describe moments where humanity stood at the edge and refused to fall quietly. The deadliest last stands in history were not about winning the day. They were about proving that even in the face of annihilation, people can choose how they meet the end. And sometimes that choice changes the course of history.